Okay, wow, so excited to share with you guys today our next installment of Sought and Rescued about King David. And before I dive into his story, I just want to give a brief recap of where we've been so far this semester. We've been on quite the journey, so let's just recap where we've been. We've been through Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Judges, and the first king of Israel, Saul. Wow, okay. So let's just recall where we've been. So when our first parents who walked in the cool of the day with God the Father in the Garden of Eden, they chose not to trust God and they caused our first fall. But God immediately responded with a promise, and he said that a descendant of Adam and of Eve would crush the head of the serpent and break kind of this curse of humanity and bring us back into right relationship with God. So since this moment, the whole heartbeat of humanity has been anticipation. Who will save us from ourselves? Who will deliver us? Someone from this line is going to bring us back into this unitive, right relationship with God. And each narrative we've heard has given us a little bit of hope. You know, we think here's another chance, here's another opportunity to restore that relationship and choose God and live according to his plan. And we saw pretty quickly that we're going to be disappointed. Again and again, we've been disappointed. So with Cain and Abel, you know, that went south pretty quick. Then we had Noah. God washes away the entire world and starts over, which sounds great, but bad news. It looks like sin and brokenness have followed humanity onto the ark and come out with us on the other side. And with Abraham, we see him growing in faith and trust over the course of his life, but he still falls short, although he does receive some great promises from God that he's going to receive a nation, a name, and a blessing through his descendants. And then we had Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, who all looked pretty promising, but they so often fell into the trap of disobeying God or not being faithful for their own gain. And we had Moses lead the people out of Egypt, which was exciting. Okay, redemption, freedom from slavery. But he himself fails to trust God, and the entire generation of Moses actually is not allowed into the promised land because they would willingly choose slavery over their freedom with God and a relationship with him because it seems easier. So gosh, it's not looking too good. And then last time, 2 weeks ago, Katie walked us through Judges, which was some spicy stories there. They were supposed to call the people of Israel back into obedience and relationship with God, but so often fell into sin and wickedness that they were unable to really lead the people well. And then finally, the first king of Israel. So where we're at now is, after the Judges, the Israelites are begging God for a king. They're looking at other nations and they say, we want a human leader like all the other nations have. And God tells them the truth. He's like, guys, are you sure? Are you sure you want a king? Because right now I'm your king. And I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good what we have going on. And if you get a human king, look at all the other nations. Kings levy taxes on their people. They take all their sons and take them off to war, and their sons are killed in battle. That's what's going to happen if you have a human king. But they say, no, we want a king. We won't have anything else. We want someone to lead us and give us direction. So God gives them what they ask for, and he asks his prophet Samuel to anoint Saul, the first king of Israel. And in many ways, Saul is a strong leader, at least by human standards. He looks really good on paper, checks a lot of boxes. He's a really good military leader in a lot of ways, and leads his people to some victories. But at the same time, he's pretty power hungry, he's insecure, he's jealous, and he's ultimately disobedient. And he looks to things other than God to secure his power. So because of his unfaithfulness, God actually rejects Saul as king. And he says that he is going to take the kingdom away from Saul's line because Saul has been disobedient to him. And he goes back to his prophet Samuel. He seems to consult his prophets a lot. And he asks Samuel, he's like, hey, we got to pick another king. I can't have Saul's descendants be part of the leading the kingdom anymore because they've been unfaithful to me. So I want you to go and anoint another man to be the heir to the throne. So Samuel, a little hesitantly, kind of nervous for his life because, Saul is still king. He does obey God, and he goes where God tells him to go, to a man named Jesse who lives in Bethlehem with several of his sons. And God has told Samuel that one of these sons is going to be the next king of Israel. And so Samuel goes to Jesse's house and he says, Jesse, I hear you have a bunch of sons. I would like to meet them, thank you. And so Jesse brings out his sons one by one, and the oldest comes out first. And this man is tall, he's the eldest, which of course is a privileged place in the family. He's strong, he's experienced, he seems like the leader of his brothers, and Samuel thinks, surely this is going to be the next king of Israel. It looks like he kind of meets all the qualifications. But God says, no, it's not this one. I do not want to anoint him king. And he says to Samuel, do not judge from his appearance or from his lofty stature, because I have rejected him. God does not see as a mortal who sees the appearance. The Lord looks into the heart. So this whole time, the people of Israel are really struggling to have some really good guidance and a leader who will bring them into a relationship with God. And God is also a little tired of this. And he wants someone after his own heart. He wants his people's heart. He wants someone who will be faithful to him, not just a good leader by human standards, but someone who will lead them into a relationship with him as his children once again, like Adam and Eve were before the fall. So he's really looking at the heart. So it's not the oldest son. And one by one, 7 sons, Jesse leads out his sons all the way to the youngest. And each one, Samuel thinks, this one is going to be the next king of Israel. Looks like a good candidate. And God says, no, that's not him. And finally they get through the 7th son, and God says, no, it's not this one. And Samuel's kind of confused. He's like, oh, Jesse, do you have any other sons? Is there someone out back that you forgot? And Jesse says, well, I do have one more son. I mean, he's the youngest. He's kind of a little guy, and he's out watching the sheep. I didn't actually bother calling him in because, he's just tending the sheep. He's laboring in the fields. Samuel says, go call him in. And in walks David, and it says that he is ruddy, a youth with beautiful eyes and good looking. And God says, that's the one. And I feel like, in this way, the eyes of a mortal and the eyes of God seem to be aligned because he seems like a really attractive man. But, so God says, that's the one, that's the youngest. But by human standards, the youngest, of course, is the least in the family. And he's ruddy, meaning he works out in the fields. He's a laborer. He spends his days among the sheep and doesn't look to be a great leader necessarily. But God says, that's the one. And so Samuel anoints David, which doesn't mean that David is the new king immediately, but essentially he is the new heir to the throne. So Saul, the king, his firstborn son is not going to be the next king. He's not next in line anymore. David is instead. And at this moment when David is anointed, it says the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon David. So before the sacrament of confirmation existed, basically David got to have confirmation. He got to have a relationship with the Holy Spirit, really at a time when no one did, back in the Old Testament. So the Spirit of the Lord rushes on David, and from this moment onward, everything David does is going to be super blessed. He's going to be super successful at every endeavor. He's going to be popular, he's going to perform well, and we'll see how that is both a great thing and maybe not so great of a thing. But the Spirit of the Lord rushes on David, and soon after this, Saul and David actually meet. Because Saul has been disobedient, the Spirit of God has kind of left Saul, and he has left him to his own devices, and he's left him vulnerable to an evil spirit that torments Saul frequently. He has these kind of fits of rage and anxiety. And one of Saul's courtiers advises him, hey, I know this guy, he lives out in Bethlehem, he's super talented on the harp. He could come and play for you and calm you down by playing the harp when you have one of these fits of rage. And so Saul agrees, and lo and behold, it's David. He's a Renaissance man. He can do it all. He can tend the sheep. We'll learn later that he can kill a lion. He also is a musician. That's great. The Spirit of the Lord is with him. And so David plays the harp for Saul whenever Saul is upset. And because the Holy Spirit is gracing everything that he does, he really calms Saul down and brings the Holy Spirit kind of into the throne room. So Saul actually really likes David because he's useful to him. So that's nice. It might not always be that way, though. Because one day, so you guys might know that the Philistines are the perpetual bad guys in the Old Testament. They are always fighting the kingdom of Israel. And this time is no different. Saul and his men are out at war with the Philistines, and they're in these two camps, right? Once there's a battle line in the middle, the Philistines are on one side, the Israelites are on another side, and they're about to start to fight each other. But you guys might know this story. They don't actually have a battle because someone from the side of the Philistines comes up and challenges the people of Israel. A champion named Goliath of Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 6 cubits and a span tall. You guys have heard of Goliath. He's a giant, right? 6 cubits in a span. I couldn't find an exact conversion, but it's somewhere between 9 and 12 feet tall. And I'm 5'5", so you just imagine someone twice my height, and you'd probably also be terrified. He's also decked out in like tons of crazy armor. His spear is like the size of a small tree, so it's like kind of scary, you know. And the Israelites are terrified. And Goliath kind of issues this challenge. He says, why come out in battle formation? Why do we have to do this whole thing where a bunch of us kill a bunch of you and it's super bloody and we have to do a bunch of stuff with the bodies? Like, it's just really inconvenient. I'm a Philistine, you're Saul's servants. Choose one of your men and have him come down to me. If he beats me in combat and kills me, we will be your vassals, your servants. But if I beat him and kill him, you shall be our vassals and serve us. I don't know if any of you have had the privilege of playing What Are the Odds with Kara, but that's basically what's happening here. What are the odds you beat me? If you do, then we'll be your slaves. Which, I mean, if you've played What Are the Odds with Kara, like you never win, you know, like it's never actually like a good experience necessarily. But and so there's like no chance here. Like this guy is a freaking massive 12-foot tall giant, in armor. So I don't know how they intend to beat him, and they know that. They're like, this is terrifying, and they all run away scared. He says, I defy the ranks of Israel today. Give me a man and let us fight together. When Saul and all of Israel heard this challenge of the Philistine, they were stunned and terrified. Oh, not good. Okay, but in walks David. So 3 of David's oldest brothers actually are in Saul's army, and they hear this challenge, right? But they're among all the other soldiers, and they're just like trembling in their boots behind the battle line. And this is just a classic, like, older brother, younger brother moment that I love. Jesse, David's dad, goes to David, and he's like, hey, your older brothers are out doing things, out in war. Go bring them some snacks. Your mom made a nice lamb stew for them. Go bring it to them on the battle line. David's like, okay. So he like puts the sheep away and he runs. Oh, and he's also bringing 10 wheels of cheese to the commanding officer, I guess, to like butter him up. I don't know. But yeah, he's bringing some food to his brothers, and he goes to the battle line and he like leaves the food with the guy at the tent or whatever, and he like wants to go see his brothers. So he goes down to the battle line and starts chatting. And while he's there, Goliath comes up and basically says the same thing again, which he apparently has done like every day for 40 days. Like he just comes up every day, and they haven't actually like touched any weapons or done anything. They just like watch Goliath issue this challenge, and then they all run away. So that's what it looks like. But David hears him, and he's like, what's up with that? Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that's insulting the ranks of Israel? He's like, not about it. And they say, well, like all the men are around David, you know, this little boy, right? And they're like, well, Saul says whoever beats Goliath is going to get his daughter in marriage, and his family will be exempt from taxes forever. He's going to get a lot of rewards. And David is like confused. He's like, so like, why is no one fighting him? Like, what's the problem? And they're like, oh my gosh. And then his oldest brother hears him, and he's like, what are you doing here? He like has him in a noogie, and he's like, you left the sheep back with dad? Are you kidding me? Like, I know why you're here. You just wanted to be entertained and like see a good fight. And David, I kid you not, says, what's the matter? I was only talking. Like, that is a direct quote from scripture, which is just like a fun, very human older brother, little brother relationship. But that's not really the point. The point is that David goes to Saul, King Saul, and he says, my Lord should not lose heart. Let your servant go and fight this Philistine. He's like, I'll go do it. I'm not scared. Saul is like, you cannot do that because you are a little child. And this man has been a soldier since he was a little child, and now he's a 12-foot tall giant. But David says, your servant used to tend his father's sheep. This is right here. Your servant used to tend his father's sheep. And whenever a lion or a bear came to carry up a sheep from the flock, I would chase after it, attack it, and snatch the prey from its mouth. If it attacked me, I would seize it by the throat, strike it, and kill it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be as one of them because he's insulted the armies of the living God. He's like a 16-year-old kid. He's like, so I killed a lion and a bear. Like, what else do you want to know? And I play a sick harp. So what more do you want, really? So Saul's like, okay, great, you can do it. And David really trusts God here. It's kind of cool to see his heart for God in this moment. He says, the same Lord who delivered me from the claws of the lion and the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul says, go, the Lord will be with you. And it's actually really sweet. Saul gives him like his own armor and his own sword. And David's like really small, so he's like can't even walk. And he's like, forget this. He puts the armor away and he says, I'm doing this my own way, and I'm doing it with God. So he goes down to the river, gets a few stones, puts them in his slingshot, and he walks up to the battle line, and he calls out to Goliath, like, I'm ready to challenge you. And Goliath comes up, and he laughs because he sees this little kid. And you might have heard this line before. He says, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Basically, like, you can't actually, like, kill me with this guy. It's so silly. But he's laughing at him. David is not fazed, super casual. He just, like, puts a rock in his sling, flings it around his head, releases. A stone gets buried in Saul's temple, and he falls, and Goliath's temple, sorry, and he falls over dead, like, just like that. And David runs up and takes Goliath's own sword from his sheath and cuts off Goliath's head, like, no big deal. It's over in like 2 minutes, basically. Because he trusts God and he has courage. So now the Philistines are terrified. They all run away. All the Israelites are excited. They carry David off on their shoulders with Goliath's head. It's very exciting. And then Saul and David get to march back in Jerusalem triumphantly after the defeat of the Philistine army and the defeat of Goliath. And, it says here, at the approach of Saul and David, on David's return after striking down the Philistine, women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet Saul the king, singing and dancing with tambourines, joyful songs, and stringed instruments. The women played and sang, Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. And Saul does not like this. He, as I said, is an insecure and jealous man, and he is pretty upset that, oh, so nice, they gave me thousands of victories, but they gave David tens of thousands. And it says at the end here, from that day on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. So whereas before Saul kind of favored David, you know, he was like useful to him, he helped him get over his moods. Now he realizes that everyone loves David, and he's actually more popular than he is. And I mean, he also just proved that he's far more courageous than Saul as well, and more successful in battle. So from this day on, their relationship is pretty tumultuous. When David comes in to play the harp and Saul's so upset, Saul just like tends to grab a spear and throw it at David and try to pin him to the wall, but you know, he's blessed in everything he does, so he dodges and he never gets caught, he just runs away. But this happens like 10 times. David still plays the harp for Saul. I don't really get it, but yeah, Saul is always like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, but he's a psycho, so you know, it doesn't really mean anything. But it gets so bad, like Saul decides to bribe David to go into these like really difficult battles. And he says, I'll give you my daughter in marriage, which is funny because he already earned his daughter in marriage by killing Goliath. But he says, I'll give you my daughter in marriage if you come back with 100 Philistine foreskins. Kill 100 Philistines and bring me their foreskins. And you know how David is super zealous about circumcision and killing Philistines, and he says, sweet. And he comes back with not 100, but 200 foreskins, and he goes into the throne room and counts them for Saul. 1, 2. He lays them all out, and then he gets his daughter in marriage, and Saul is not very happy about that. Saul eventually decides, I just gotta kill this guy. Like, I don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna kill him. But David is super popular everywhere he goes. Turns out that Saul's daughter, who's married to David, is actually totally smitten with David, of course. And Saul's firstborn son, Jonathan, is best friends with David. Everyone loves him. So of course they tell him, hey, my dad wants to kill you. You should probably run away. So he does. So he spends a lot of time running, hiding in the hill country, hiding in caves. He brings a lot of his loyal men with him. So it's like David and his men are out there hiding from Saul, and Saul comes around looking for him and trying to kill him. And there's one time when Saul and his men are hiding in a cave. David and his men are hiding in a cave, and Saul and his men are approaching. So David and his men retreat farther back into the cave, and they kind of like hide around a corner so that they won't see them at all. But you know, Saul's had a long day. He's been out there riding, you know, it's hot, he's drinking a lot of water. He needs to use the bathroom. And what better place to go than in the cave? And apparently he actually needs to go number 2 because he needs to like take his time with it and really like squat down and relax. So he goes in the cave and is, you know, relieving himself. And David and his men see him, and David's men are like, hey, the Lord has delivered his life into your hands. This guy who's hunting you down to kill you is pooping over there in the corner. You could kill him right now. This is perfect. And David says, no, far be it from me to touch the Lord's anointed. I could not do it even though he be pooping in my cave. But he does sneak up behind him, and he cuts off a little piece of his cloak, right? So, which must have been an interesting experience. And he sneaks back. Saul leaves the cave, you know, wipes his butt, leaves the cave. And David comes out and he waves this piece of his cloak and he says, Saul, Saul, my father. You know, David is still loyal to the king, right? He like really sees him as a father. And the Lord has anointed him king, so he respects that, you know. But not enough not to cut up his cloak. So he says, look, I could have killed you just now. Like, this could have been your head that I was holding. But I spared your life. So why are you hunting me down and trying to kill me? And actually, I apologize for cutting up your cloak. I'm really sorry about that, too. I actually regret that. And Saul, you know, he's so dramatic and so moody. He's like, oh, my son, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me, blah, blah, blah. It only lasts for a little while. He tries it again. David spares his life again. Saul just, yeah, he can't be tamed. So David has to spend his life on the run. But you know, Saul's life gets worse and worse, and he starts like consulting mediums and going to other things and not sacrificing properly to God. And battles start going very poorly for Saul. All of his sons, including Jonathan, David's friend, die in this one battle, and Saul's just so despairing, he ends up actually taking his own life. And the word of Saul's death reaches David, and David mourns for him. Like, even though this man was trying to kill him, David had so much fidelity to the king of Israel that he mourns his death. But really, this is when, yeah, David now enters into the kingship. So that's exciting. King David, you know, this is a good time for Israel. And as we know, he's super blessed. Like, military victories are following him everywhere. All the ladies love him. He's a super popular ruler. He brings the Ark of the Covenant, actually, which is God's very present, back into Jerusalem, and like praise dances with abandon as he does that. He's super zealous for the Lord and for God's people. And he leads the people of Israel to many victories. And yeah, life is pretty good, you know, life is good. David actually is, yeah, he's got everything going for him. He's powerful, he's popular, and he's faithful to God. But this is where it gets a little dodgy, because David's life is so good, he starts actually to get pretty comfortable, you know? He starts to kind of forget why he's the king in the first place and what his role as the king is. He starts to get a little complacent. And this is where he kind of runs into trouble, actually. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 11, we read, at the turn of the year, at the time when kings go to war, David sent out Joab along with his officers and all Israel, and they laid waste the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. David himself remained in Jerusalem. Okay, pause. What time of year is it? The time of year when kings go to war. Where's David? Not where he's supposed to be. That's true. Yes, he is not at war. He's in Jerusalem. He's like kicking up his feet, eating bonbons in his palace, comfortable. And this, okay, it's like not the worst thing in the world, but really he's like not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Like, he is God's chosen person to lead his people, both in virtue and faithfulness to him, but also like in battle, in their military conquests. And so it is not good that David's out here just like lounging around. As we see, one evening, David rose from his bed and strolled about on the roof of the king's house. It's just like this image of just like total laxity. He rose from his bed in the evening. He's just been in bed all day, if you're in bed in the evening, and he's strolling about. So yeah, getting kind of lazy. You know, all his men are at war, like sacrificing for the kingdom, and David is just strolling around on the roof. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. She was very beautiful. Uh-oh. Okay, it's okay, it's okay. David, turn your eyes, avert your eyes, say, how lovely is your dwelling place, oh God. Thank you for making a beautiful woman. I love you, Jesus. You inspired me to look at the true source of beauty. It's okay. And I'm going to stop thinking about it. No, that's not what he does. That's not what he does. He actually is totally captivated by this woman and starts lusting after her and can't get her off of his mind. And so, yeah, he actually asks about this woman, like, who is she? I gotta know who she is. This beautiful woman on the roof. And he learns that she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, Joab's armor bearer. Then David sent messengers and took her. When she came to him, he took her to bed at a time when she was just purified after her period, and she returned to her house. But the woman had become pregnant. Okay, it's really escalated super fast. Okay, so David was just forgetting who he was. He was lazy, he was complacent, he wasn't living into his identity and his role as king. So he's getting lazy, and then he lusts after a woman. His sin is kind of like escalating here. And then that lust leads him to adultery. And don't forget, David is also married to this woman who's like totally in love with him, Saul's daughter. But he commits adultery. And then she becomes pregnant. And for all the messiness in this relationship, I have to commend them for one thing, and that's clear communication. Because Bathsheba sends a message to inform David, I'm pregnant. So, at least they have that going for them, ladies. You can't drop hints, you can't be vague. You just got to say it like it is. I'm pregnant. So that's that. But this isn't looking good. This isn't looking good for David's reputation. It's kind of bad if the king, who's the leader of Israel, got some lady pregnant. Also, she has a husband who probably will not want to kill David, as they do back then. So he has a plan, though. Don't worry. Just kidding. I don't have that up there. That's okay. Okay, so what's David's plan? So he says, it's okay. I'm a clever man. I'm super intelligent. I'm blessed in everything that I do. So what am I going to do? I'm going to actually summon Uriah. I'm going to summon Uriah and give him leave from battle, right? The husband of Bathsheba. And I'm going to invite him back to Jerusalem, and I'm going to send him home, and he's going to sleep with his wife. And then when he finds out that she's pregnant and they have a kid, he'll think that it's his. It's perfect. So he brings Uriah home, and he says, go rest, be merry, go sleep with your woman. Not a bad thing, not a bad thing. But Uriah is so principled and so virtuous that he's like, no, all the men are out sleeping on the floor, and they're out in battle, they're sacrificing for the people. Far be it from me to sleep with my wife. Well, they're out there in the field of battle. And David's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? And this probably is really pissing David off because David can't stop sleeping with women, apparently. So it's really, it's really annoying when someone is way more virtuous than you and you're trying to get them messed up. It's just inconvenient. But it's okay, he has a plan C. He gets Uriah drunk. He has him over for dinner, and he feeds him a lot of good food and wine, and he sends him home. He's like, surely now he's going to sleep with his wife. And Uriah says, no, how can I do that when all the men are out there sleeping on the floor? And so he too decides to still sleep at the foot, the step of David's house instead of going to sleep with his wife. Oh my gosh, this is not working. So David sends him back to battle, and he tells his commanding officer, Joab, hey man, do me a solid, send Uriah up to the worst parts of the battle, and then when all the Ammonites come to attack you guys, draw back and leave Uriah for dead. Not very subtle. Which he does, and Uriah is killed, okay, successful. And then after Bathsheba has a little time of mourning, David takes her as her wife, and he has a second wife now. So it looks like it all turned out okay, right? It's all good. It all worked out for David. No! God is so upset. He's like, come on, man. You were supposed to be this great king. You were after my heart. You were obedient to me. You were faithful. You were good. You've been leading your people well. And I'm not having this. So, as God likes to do, he talks to one of his prophets. He goes to Nathan this time. Samuel's dead. Oh, sad. Okay. So Samuel's dead. But God talks to his prophet Nathan, and he says, hey, you need to go tell David that I am not pleased with him. You need to tell him about his sin. Hope to inspire some kind of remorse in him. So Nathan goes to David, and he tells him his story. He says, David, imagine. There's a wealthy man who has many flocks of sheep and goats. He has everything that he needs. He has all the resources and money in the world. And he's super, super successful in his sheep business. But one day this wealthy man is surprised by a guest who comes to visit him, and he thinks, oh, I gotta feed him, I gotta give him something to eat. And he looks at all his sheep and his goats, and he says, oh, I'm not gonna kill one of them. I'm gonna take this little ewe lamb from the poor man down the street, the one single ewe lamb. I just have to say it because it says ewe lamb in the Bible so many times. It's so funny. It says this poor man raised the ewe lamb on his breast like his own child from a young age, a little ewe lamb. And the rich man says, I'll take that one. He takes the ewe lamb and he kills him and he feeds it to his guest. And Nathan says to David, what would you do with this man? What would be your judgment on this man? And David says, kill him! That is so terrible. I can't believe he would do that. He was a wealthy man who had everything at his disposal, and yet he took the one thing that this poor man had. And Nathan goes, you are that man. And David goes, oh my gosh. And it's super dramatic. You should read it sometime. But so I don't know if you guys have ever had that experience where you just hear a story and it just hits you so hard. You're like, it's me. Oh my gosh. And so this happens to David, and it's true. It is him. He is the man who took the wife of Uriah and took her as his own and then killed Uriah, when really David had everything going for him. Everything was in his favor, right? And so we see that, like, yeah, David has, like, kind of, he's fallen in this way, right? He's committed very serious sin, which we saw escalate time and time again. He just, like, went down this slippery slope of complacency, lust, adultery, and finally murder. Like, it got bad, right? But in this moment when he realizes his sin, he really gives us a beautiful example of true repentance and remorse. And if you guys have never read Psalm 51, I really encourage you to pray with it. Maybe the next time you need to go to confession. It's actually a psalm that David wrote after Nathan confronted him about his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. You guys might recognize some lines for it. Create in me a clean heart, O God, renew in me a steadfast spirit. It's also where we get the part of the Mass where the priest says, wash me in my iniquities and cleanse me from my sin. That's part of Psalm 51. Super cool. And it says at the beginning of the psalm, David wrote this after he learned that he had sinned. And so, yeah, I just encourage you to pray with that sometime. So, yeah, David does give us a beautiful example of repentance, but we see here, after this whole story, right, like we've been waiting for someone from the line of Adam to redeem the people of Israel and bring us back into a right relationship with God, to break this curse that we've incurred through our sin and through the fall of our first parents. So we see through David's sin that it's not David. He actually, like, hasn't restored our relationship. He hasn't brought us back into unity with God. Even though he looked so hopeful, like he had so much going for him, he still was not free from sin. But he does give us a beautiful example of repentance. And God, as he's proven time and time again, God is still so faithful to his people. And not only does he keep his promise to David that, like he said to Abraham, your descendant will have a blessing, you'll have a name, you'll have a nation. But he actually kind of, I would say, amplifies this promise to David. And so, yeah, God, going to Nathan again, tells Nathan to tell David that when your days have been completed and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, sprung from your loins, and I will establish his kingdom. He it is who shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his royal throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. If he does wrong, I will reprove him with a human rod and with human punishments, but I will not withdraw my favor from him as I withdrew it from Saul who was before you. Your house and your kingdom are firm forever before me. Your throne shall be firmly established forever. So God promises three really important things at the end here. He says that a son of David will build a temple, a son of David will have a kingdom without end, and a son of David will actually be a son to God himself. He says, I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. So, and he keeps using this word forever. All these things are going to last forever. The kingdom is going to last forever, and I'm going to be his father forever. He will be my son forever, which is just this, word of like super abundance, just infinite goodness and promise that God is giving to David, even though David has not been perfect. God keeps his promise, and he actually amplifies it. And so this anticipation that we have for the one who's going to redeem Israel and the one who's going to bring us back into right relationship with God is heightened now. We're wondering who this son will be. So, come back in 2 weeks, not next week because you will be on break and we will not have Bosco night, but come back in 2 weeks to see if David's son will fulfill this promise. So that's King David, everyone, and go to seek. Okay, great. Thanks. Have a good night.